don't think so, no. I felt that that there was an opportunity for, since the American Indian hasn't been able to hear his voice heard, or have his voice heard, anywhere in the history of the United States, I felt that it was a marvelous opportunity for an Indian to be able to voice his opinion to 85 million people. I guess that was the number.
He made Frank Sinatra eat cheesecake until he got sick. He showed up on set completely naked. And during one scene, he secretly planned something so shocking that his co-star felt violated for years. Marlon Brando wasn't just difficult, he was terrifying. From throwing violent tantrums to changing scripts without warning, Hollywood's biggest star left a trail of traumatized actors who feared working with him. But the scariest part? The dangerous game he played with directors that pushed some to the edge of breakdown. Marlon Brando was born on April 3, 1924, in Omaha, Nebraska. His childhood was anything but easy. His father, Marlon Brando Sr., worked as a traveling salesman and was cold and critical. His mother, Dorothy Brando, had a passion for acting but struggled with alcoholism. Both parents were often absent, leaving Brando and his siblings to take care of themselves. He grew attached to the family's housekeeper, but when she left to get married, he felt abandoned again. That feeling of loss stayed with him for the rest of his life. His family background was German, Dutch, Irish, and English, though many later assumed he had Italian roots because of his most famous roles. The Brandos moved constantly. At age 6, they relocated to Evanston, Illinois. In 1936, his parents separated but got back together 2 years later. When they reunited, they bought a farmhouse in Libertyville, Illinois. Brando was creative, but restless. He had a talent for imitating people and loved playing pranks, but he struggled in school. He failed most of his subjects and had to repeat a grade. His rebellious nature kept getting him into trouble. In 1941, he was expelled after reportedly riding a motorcycle through the halls. His father had enough and sent him to Shattuck Military Academy in Minnesota, hoping strict discipline would straighten him out. Shattuck was known for its tough rules, but Brando refused to be controlled. He was charismatic and confident, but his love for pranks never faded. One of his most famous stunts involved climbing the school's bell tower, removing the clapper, and burying it so the daily schedule would be thrown off. Despite his troublemaking, he had a natural talent for acting. His English teacher, Earl Duke Wagner, cast him as the lead in the school's commencement play. That moment changed everything. Brando finally found something that felt right, but his rebellious streak got the best of him again. In May 1943, he was expelled. After leaving Shattuck, he worked briefly as a ditch digger while trying to figure out his next step. He attempted to enlist in the Army during World War II, but an old football injury from Shattuck left him with a trick knee. He was disqualified from service. At 18, he decided to follow his sisters, Jocelyn and Frances, to New York City. Jocelyn was already acting on Broadway, while Frances pursued art. For the first time, he was free from his father's control. He took small jobs to survive, working as an elevator operator and a waiter, while exploring the city's artistic scene. Brando enrolled at the dramatic workshop of the New School for Social Research, under the guidance of German director Erwin Piscator. Soon after, he joined Stella Adler at the Actors Studio. Adler was one of the best acting teachers in the country. She taught method acting, but unlike Lee Strasberg, who believed actors should use their personal memories to create emotions, Adler focused on finding truth within the script. She saw Brando's raw talent immediately. One day, she told her students to pretend they were chickens that had just realized a nuclear bomb was about to drop. Most ran around clucking in a panic. Brando calmly sat down and pretended to lay an egg. His choice was unexpected, but it showed his ability to think deeply about a character's emotions. That instinct set him apart from everyone else. He embraced method acting, but in his own way. He prioritized realism, focusing on the small details that made a character feel real. His influence would later inspire actors like Robert De Niro and Daniel Day-Lewis. In 1944, Brando made his stage debut in Hanela, playing Jesus Christ in a production at Erwin Piscator's dramatic workshop. Later that year, he appeared on Broadway in I Remember Mama, playing a Norwegian-American teenager named Nels. His performance stood out. He didn't just say his lines, he became the character. The play ran for 2 years, and critics took notice. They called him natural and authentic. In 1946, he took on bigger roles. He played Marchbanks in Candida and Joe Holland in Truckline Cafe. On opening night of Truckline Cafe, he delivered a monologue so intense that the audience sat in complete silence. The play itself wasn't a success, but Brando was unforgettable. By 1947, critics named him Broadway's most promising actor. Hollywood wasn't ready for what was coming next. Then came A Streetcar Named Desire, a Broadway play that redefined American theater. The show opened on December 3, 1947, with Brando playing Stanley Kowalski. His performance shocked audiences. He wasn't just acting, he became the character, bringing an intensity no one had seen before. He was rough and aggressive, but beneath that, there was something vulnerable. Critics called it revolutionary. The play won the Pulitzer Prize, and Brando became the most talked-about young actor in New York. But he almost didn't get the role. Producer Irene Selznick wanted John Garfield, a Hollywood star, but he turned it down. Brando wasn't even considered until Tennessee Williams invited him to his home in Provincetown for an audition. When Brando arrived, he noticed a fuse had blown and a toilet was broken. He fixed both before delivering an audition so powerful that Williams knew he had found his Stanley. Rehearsals were chaotic. Brando was often late. He had trouble memorizing lines because of dyslexia. He changed scenes without warning, frustrating his co-stars. Jessica Tandy, who played Blanche Dubois, called him an impossible psychopathic bastard. Carl Malden, who played Mitch, struggled to keep up with Brando's unpredictable style. But Elia Kazan, the director, saw something special. He later said that Brando didn't just perform, he lived the role. The play made him a star, but the 1951 film adaptation made him a legend. His torn t-shirt, his rough voice, and the moment he screamed "Stella" in the pouring rain became part of Hollywood history. Critics praised how he used body language to show emotion, fiddling with his zipper, avoiding eye contact at just the right moment. He earned his first Oscar nomination for Best Actor, though he didn't win. The film itself was nominated for 12 Academy Awards and won 4, including Best Actress for Vivien Leigh. Before Streetcar hit theaters, Brando had already made his film debut in The Men, 1950, playing a war veteran paralyzed from the waist down. To prepare, he lived in a veterans hospital in Van Nuys, California. He didn't just observe, he used a wheelchair, joined physical therapy sessions, and spent time with real paraplegics. One veteran told him about the year he spent learning to light a cigarette, despite losing arm mobility. That man later took his own life. Brando carried that pain into his performance. During filming, he never left his wheelchair, even when the cameras weren't rolling. His dedication made the film one of the most realistic depictions of disability in Hollywood at the time. His next major film was Viva Zapata, 1952, directed by Elia Kazan and written by John Steinbeck. He played Mexican revolutionary Emiliano Zapata, a man who fought against corrupt leaders. To capture the spirit of the role, Brando studied historical photos and worked with local farmers in Mexico. The film premiered on February 13, 1952. He earned another Academy Award nomination and won Best Actor at Cannes. Anthony Quinn, who played his brother, won an Oscar for Best Supporting Actor. The film was nominated for 5 Academy Awards in total. In Julius Caesar, 1953, Brando took on Shakespeare, surprising critics who doubted he could handle classical dialogue. Many thought he was just a mumbling method actor, but he proved them wrong. Playing Mark Antony, he delivered the famous "Friends, Romans, Countrymen" speech with clarity and power. He trained with Shakespearean actor John Gielgud to perfect his delivery. The film received 5 Oscar nominations and 1 for Best Art Direction. Brando earned another nomination for Best Actor and won a BAFTA for Best Foreign Actor. That same year, he played Johnny Strabler in The Wild One, 1953, a film about motorcycle gangs that captured the rebellious spirit of the 1950s. Wearing a black leather jacket and riding a Triumph Thunderbird, Brando became the face of teenage defiance. When his character was asked what he was rebelling against, he responded with the now iconic line, "What do you got?" The film was so controversial, it was banned in England until 1968. Sociologists even linked it to rising youth delinquency. Brando's look in the film inspired future generations of rebels, from James Dean to rock stars like Elvis Presley. Then came On the Waterfront, 1954, the role that earned him his first Academy Award. Directed by Elia Kazan, the film told the story of corruption on the docks of Hoboken, New Jersey. Brando played Terry Malloy, a former boxer caught in a moral struggle. The film's most famous scene was a quiet moment in a taxi with Rod Steiger. Terry, full of regret, tells his brother, "I could have been a contender." The line became one of the most quoted in film history. Brando's performance was subtle but powerful. He showed emotion through small gestures, his slumped shoulders, his hesitant speech. The film won 8 Oscars, including Best Picture and Best Director. By 1955, Brando was the most respected actor in Hollywood. Every role he took pushed the boundaries of what acting could be. He brought realism, intensity, and raw emotion to every performance. Marlon Brando and Frank Sinatra's feud on the set of Guys and Dolls in 1955 was the kind of rivalry that could only happen in Hollywood. Sinatra had wanted the lead role of Sky Masterson, but the studio gave it to Brando. That was the first insult. The second was even worse. A year earlier, Brando had beaten Sinatra for the lead in On the Waterfront, a role that won Brando an Oscar. Sinatra never forgot that loss. He started calling Brando Mumbles, making fun of the way he spoke and mocking his lack of musical talent. Their hatred boiled over during the famous cheesecake scene. In this part of the movie, Sinatra's character had to eat cheesecake while talking to Brando. There was a problem. Sinatra hated cheesecake. Brando knew that and decided to have some fun. He kept messing up his lines, forcing Sinatra to eat slice after slice as they reshot the scene. By the end of the day, Sinatra was sick and furious. The next morning, Brando walked onto the set and got the scene right on the first take. The two men wouldn't even talk to each other. They used mediators to pass messages, avoiding direct conversation as much as possible. Luckily, they didn't share much screen time, so the film moved forward. But the feud didn't stop after filming. Years later, Sinatra recorded "Luck Be a Lady," a song Brando had performed in the movie. It was his way of reclaiming what he thought should have been his all along. The rivalry between these two legends became one of Hollywood's most famous behind-the-scenes stories. Brando's difficult reputation grew even worse in Mutiny on the Bounty in 1962. The film was supposed to cost $10 million, but delays and problems pushed the budget past $20 million. A lot of that had to do with Brando. He had signed a contract for $500,000 plus 10% of the profits, and from the start, he wanted changes. He didn't like the focus on Captain Bligh. He wanted the story to center on his own character, Fletcher Christian. The script went through at least 14 rewrites, pushing production back by months. On set, Brando was unpredictable. He arrived late, refused to perform scenes he didn't like, and sometimes just stood in front of the camera without saying a word. Director Louis Milestone lost patience. He said working with Brando was like a hurricane on a rudderless ship. Eventually, he let Brando have control over certain scenes just to keep things moving. The production faced other problems too. Bad weather in Tahiti slowed things down, and a tragic accident took the life of a Tahitian crew member during a canoe sequence. By the time filming ended in October 1961, the movie was nearly a year behind schedule. When it was finally released, critics weren't impressed. It lost over $6 million, the equivalent of $62 million today, and nearly destroyed MGM. Years later, Brando admitted that his on-set behavior had damaged his career, but by then, the damage had already been done. By the mid-1960s, Brando's reputation followed him from one film set to another. In The Chase in 1966, he played a sheriff caught in the middle of a small-town crisis. The film co-starred Jane Fonda and Robert Redford, but behind the scenes, Brando made things difficult. He insisted on multiple takes, trying different approaches for every scene. Some called it dedication. Others called it unnecessary. Critics were divided. Some praised his performance. Others thought his erratic approach distracted from the film itself. Then came Reflections in a Golden Eye in 1967. Directed by John Huston, the movie was ahead of its time. Brando played Major Penderton, an army officer struggling with repressed desires. The film tackled taboo subjects like voyeurism and homosexuality, which made it controversial. His co-star Elizabeth Taylor reportedly struggled with his unpredictable acting style. Some critics called his performance brilliant. Others said it was too much. This was the pattern for Brando. When he took risks, he walked a fine line between genius and self-indulgence. His ambitions weren't limited to Hollywood. In 1967, he started working on a documentary about famine relief. He wanted to expose the crisis in developing countries and use film as a tool for change. He had already spoken out against racial injustice and supported Native American rights. But this was different. This was something he wanted to create himself. It never happened. Logistical problems started piling up. He struggled to coordinate with aid organizations. Without studio backing, funding was hard to find. His reputation didn't help either. By then, most studios saw him as unreliable. On top of that, Brando was a perfectionist. If a project didn't match his vision, he had no problem walking away. The documentary was abandoned. Brando's career was filled with moments like this. He was brilliant, but unpredictable, and studios started avoiding him. Then came The Godfather in 1972. But Marlon Brando was not Paramount's first choice for Don Vito Corleone. In fact, the studio did not want him at all. By the late 1960s, his career was in trouble. His recent films had flopped, and he had a reputation for being difficult on set. Paramount feared hiring him would bring nothing but problems. They considered other actors, including Orson Welles, Ernest Borgnine, and Danny Thomas. But Francis Ford Coppola, the film's director, refused to back down. He believed Brando was the only actor who could bring the right depth to the character. Mario Puzo, the author of The Godfather, agreed. Brando knew he had to prove himself. At his home, he staged a screen test that would become legendary. He stuffed cotton balls in his cheeks, slicked back his hair with shoe polish, and lowered his voice to a gravelly tone. The transformation was incredible. Paramount executives who had opposed him from the start suddenly changed their minds. They agreed to cast him, but with strict conditions. He had to take a reduced salary of $250,000, far less than the $1 million he had once earned. He also had to sign a bond guaranteeing he would not delay production. His performance became one of the greatest in film history. Despite Paramount's doubts, The Godfather grossed between $250 million and $291 million worldwide. It became a cultural phenomenon and cemented Brando's place in Hollywood once again. But getting the role had not been easy. By 1972, Brando was in a desperate position. His career was in steep decline, and he was struggling financially. To secure the role, he made a bold decision. He agreed to work without upfront pay, and even promised to reimburse Paramount if he caused delays. It was a risky move. His salary for The Godfather was just $250,000, a fraction of what he had once earned. But he negotiated a profit-sharing deal that turned out to be a smart decision. When the film became a massive success, he earned $1.6 million from it. On set, he was as unpredictable as ever. He refused to memorize lines and relied on cue cards. Sometimes they were taped to other actors' bodies. This method frustrated some cast members, but it made his performance feel natural. He also clashed with Paramount when they considered casting Burt Reynolds as Michael Corleone. Brando was so against the idea that he threatened to quit. He often arrived late or unprepared, forcing Coppola to adjust plans at the last minute. Despite all this, Coppola later admitted that Brando's talent made every challenge worth it. Then came one of the most shocking moments of his career. In 1973, Brando won the Academy Award for Best Actor, but he refused to accept it. Instead, he sent Native American activist Sacheen Littlefeather to decline the award on his behalf. She gave a short speech at the ceremony, protesting Hollywood's treatment of Native Americans and mentioning the standoff at Wounded Knee. The reaction was intense. Some people applauded, but others booed. Backstage, actor John Wayne reportedly had to be held back from attacking her. Littlefeather paid a heavy price for her involvement. She faced years of harassment and was blacklisted in Hollywood. Brando, however, stood by his decision. His protest became one of the most politically charged moments in Oscar history. Decades later, the Academy issued an official apology to Littlefeather, acknowledging the way she had been treated. Marlon Brando was a legend in Hollywood, but two of his most famous films came with controversy and chaos. Last Tango in Paris in 1972 and Apocalypse Now in 1979 were groundbreaking. Yet, behind the scenes, they exposed the dark side of filmmaking. Power, ethics, and Brando's unpredictable nature all played a role in the madness that unfolded. When Brando took the role in Last Tango in Paris, he was 48. His co-star, Maria Schneider, was only 19. Bernardo Bertolucci directed the film, which became known for its explicit content. But one scene in particular sparked outrage. The butter scene, where Brando's character uses butter as a lubricant, was not in the original script. Schneider later revealed that she had no idea about it until moments before filming. She felt shocked, humiliated, and betrayed. Years later, she said she felt assaulted by Marlon and Bertolucci. Bertolucci admitted in a 2013 interview that he and Brando had planned the scene in secret. He said he wanted Schneider to feel real humiliation, not just act it. He believed that her reaction would make the film more powerful. When this interview resurfaced in 2016, people were furious. Filmmakers and actors like Ava DuVernay and Chris Evans called it abusive and unethical. Schneider struggled for years after the film. She battled drug addiction and mental health issues. She later said that what happened on set played a part in her struggles. Last Tango in Paris was banned in several countries for its explicit content and faced censorship battles, but the damage had already been done. Brando himself later admitted that he felt manipulated by Bertolucci. Even for an actor of his status, the director had too much control. The film remains a symbol of how far directors have pushed actors in the name of art, raising serious questions about ethics and consent in filmmaking. Just a few years later, Brando took on another iconic role, but this time, he nearly wrecked the entire production. In Apocalypse Now, he played Colonel Kurtz, the mysterious figure at the heart of Francis Ford Coppola's Vietnam War epic. When Brando arrived on set in Manila in 1976, Coppola was stunned. He was overweight, out of shape, and completely unprepared. He hadn't even read Heart of Darkness, the novella that inspired the film. Coppola had imagined Kurtz as a lean, almost skeletal figure. Brando's appearance forced him to rethink everything. To hide his weight gain, he dressed him in black and shot him mostly in shadows or close-ups. At times, he used a body double to create Kurtz's silhouette. These last-minute changes ended up making the character even more haunting and mysterious. Brando's behavior made things even harder. He demanded $3 million for 3 weeks of work, but refused to shoot past 5:30 p.m. or work on weekends. For days, he avoided filming and instead had long philosophical conversations with Coppola about everything except the movie. When he finally agreed to film, he refused to memorize his lines, so Coppola had to feed them to him through an earpiece. With time running out, Coppola had to improvise much of Kurtz's dialogue and scenes. Despite the chaos, Brando delivered an unforgettable performance. His slow, hypnotic speech and eerie presence became one of the film's greatest strengths. But Apocalypse Now was a nightmare to make. The entire production lasted 238 days. A typhoon destroyed sets. The budget spiraled out of control. Martin Sheen, who played the lead role, suffered a heart attack on set. Coppola himself nearly had a breakdown. Years later, he admitted that Brando's behavior had been one of the biggest challenges and that he felt betrayed by the actor's lack of preparation. The two never worked together again. Marlon Brando returned to acting in the late 1980s after years away from Hollywood. His first major role was in A Dry White Season, 1989, a powerful drama set in apartheid-era South Africa. Directed by Eugene Palcy, the film told the story of a white schoolteacher who takes a stand against racial injustice. Brando played Ian McKenzie, a human rights lawyer willing to risk everything to fight oppression. His performance was so compelling that it earned him an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor, his last Oscar nod. Brando didn't take the role for money. He was so moved by Palcy's passion for the project that he agreed to work for union-scale pay, just $4,000, far less than his usual fee. It was a rare moment where his dedication to storytelling outweighed his usual reluctance to work. In 1995, Brando returned with a very different film. He starred in Don Juan de Marco, a romantic comedy drama with Johnny Depp. Brando played Dr. Jack Mickler, a psychiatrist treating a young man who believes he is the legendary lover Don Juan. The film had charm, and Brando's presence gave it weight, but critics felt he wasn't fully invested. Some accused him of delivering a performance that was lazy and detached. Director Jeremy Levin reportedly struggled with Brando's unpredictable behavior. Brando had a habit of testing directors by delivering scenes with different levels of effort. If the director didn't notice, he lost respect for them. Some believe this was his way of keeping himself entertained. Others saw it as a sign that he didn't care about acting anymore. While Don Juan DeMarco was a small bump in his later career, The Island of Dr. Moreau, 1996, was a complete disaster. The sci-fi horror film, based on H.G. Wells's novel, was doomed from the start. The production suffered from endless rewrites, bad weather, and fights between cast members. When Brando finally arrived on set, weeks late, he immediately made his presence known with strange demands. He designed his own makeup. He wore fake dentures that gave him an overbite. He spoke in an odd British accent. He insisted on wearing peacock feathers and an ice bucket on his head. Things got even stranger when filming began. Brando refused to memorize lines and used an earpiece to have them fed to him. But sometimes his earpiece picked up police radio signals. In the middle of filming, he would suddenly repeat things like, "There's a robbery at Woolworth's," leaving the cast and crew baffled. He also suggested bizarre changes to the script. One of his ideas was to reveal that Dr. Moreau was actually a dolphin. No one knew if he was joking. The chaos didn't stop with Brando. His co-star Val Kilmer was just as difficult. The two actors clashed, sometimes refusing to leave their trailers until the other did first. Director John Frankenheimer was caught in the middle. He struggled to keep the production together. When Kilmer finished his final scene, Frankenheimer reportedly shouted, "Now get that bastard off my set." The behind-the-scenes disaster was so extreme that years later, a documentary was made about it. Lost Soul, the doomed journey of Richard Stanley's Island of Dr. Moreau, exposed just how much of a nightmare the production had been. Even after that mess, Brando wasn't done causing trouble in Hollywood. His final film was The Score, 2001, a heist thriller with Robert De Niro and Edward Norton. Directed by Frank Oz, the film should have been a smooth production. But from the moment Brando arrived, he made sure it wasn't. He mocked Oz constantly. He refused to take direction from him. He called him Miss Piggy and once told him, "I bet you wish I was a puppet so you could stick your hand up my ass and make me do what you want." Things got so bad that Brando refused to be on set if Oz was there. This forced Robert De Niro to step in. De Niro ended up directing some of Brando's scenes while Oz watched from another room and gave instructions through assistants. There were also bizarre rumors that Brando performed some scenes naked from the waist down because of the summer heat in Montreal. This turned out to be exaggerated. He was actually wearing shorts under his oversized shirt during breaks. Despite the drama, The Score was a success. It debuted at number 2 at the box office behind Legally Blonde and was well received by critics. It brought together 3 generations of actors: Brando, De Niro, and Norton. But behind the scenes, Brando's difficult behavior overshadowed the film. His final years in Hollywood were a mix of brilliance and chaos. When he cared, he delivered unforgettable performances. When he didn't, he tested the patience of everyone around him. By the end of his career, his reputation was just as famous as his talent. Even when he frustrated directors, no one could deny that Marlon Brando was one of a kind. Marlon Brando and Rita Moreno had a love story filled with passion, betrayal, and heartbreak. They met in 1954 on the set of Desiree, and from the start, Brando's charm pulled Moreno into a relationship she later called intoxicating and destructive. He was never one to stay loyal. While seeing Moreno, he married twice, first to Anna Kashfi in 1957, then to Movita Castaneda in 1960, fathering children with both women. Yet Moreno couldn't let go. Decades later, she still described him as the lust of her life. Their love story took a dark turn when Moreno became pregnant. Instead of supporting her, Brando arranged for an abortion. At the time, abortion was illegal in the United States, so he paid a doctor $500 to do it in secret. But the procedure was botched. Moreno was left bleeding and in agony. When doctors at the hospital examined her, they found the fetus had not been fully removed. She needed emergency surgery to survive. Brando's reaction was cold. He wasn't devastated or regretful, just angry that the doctor had done a poor job. The trauma pushed Moreno into a deep depression. She later admitted that the emotional pain became unbearable. One night, she swallowed a bottle of sleeping pills. If Brando's assistant hadn't found her in time and rushed her to the hospital, she wouldn't have survived. Looking back, she realized much of her suffering came from desperately trying to win Brando's love, despite his constant betrayals. Their relationship remains one of Hollywood's most tragic love affairs, one built on passion but poisoned by pain. Decades later, another Brando scandal would shock the world. On May 16, 1990, Marlon Brando's son, Christian Brando, shot and killed Doug Drolet, the boyfriend of his half-sister Cheyenne Brando. The murder happened inside Brando's Los Angeles mansion, a place once seen as a retreat, but forever marked by tragedy. Christian had always struggled with addiction and anger. That night, Cheyenne, who was 8 months pregnant, told him Drolet had been abusing her. Enraged, Christian confronted Drolet after dinner. Moments later, a gunshot rang out. Christian claimed the gun had gone off accidentally during a struggle, but the damage was done. Drolet was dead. The media went into a frenzy. This wasn't just any Hollywood scandal. This was the son of Marlon Brando, one of the greatest actors of all time, caught in a real-life crime drama. Christian pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter, avoiding a murder charge. His lawyer, Robert Shapiro, who would later become famous for defending O.J. Simpson, negotiated a plea deal that got Christian a 10-year sentence. He served only 5 years before being released on parole. Marlon Brando was devastated. During the trial, he broke down in court, saying he had failed as a father. In the moments after the shooting, he had desperately tried to save Drolet, giving him mouth-to-mouth resuscitation and calling 911. But there was nothing he could do. The damage wasn't just to Drolet. The entire Brando family would never be the same. Cheyenne, who had been at the center of it all, spiraled out of control. She was supposed to testify against Christian, but before the trial, she fled to Tahiti. Her mental health had always been fragile, but after losing Drolet, she completely unraveled. She attempted suicide multiple times and was eventually diagnosed with schizophrenia. She lost custody of her newborn son, Tuki, who was raised by his grandmother. On April 16, 1995, Cheyenne hanged herself at her mother's home in Tahiti. She was only 25. Marlon Brando, once one of Hollywood's most powerful figures, was powerless to stop the tragedies that consumed his family. He didn't even attend her funeral. By the time Marlon Brando passed away on July 1, 2004, at the age of 80, his life had become a tragic reflection of the complex characters he played on screen. He had been battling serious health issues, pulmonary fibrosis, heart failure, diabetes, and liver cancer. In his final days, he lost 85 pounds and relied on an oxygen tank. Even as his body gave out, he refused invasive treatments that could have prolonged his life. His ashes were scattered in 2 places that meant everything to him: Tahiti, where he had once tried to build a paradise, and Death Valley, a place he loved for its quiet emptiness. Among those ashes were some of his best friend Wally Cox's, whose remains Brando had kept for decades. At his memorial, Hollywood's biggest stars gathered to say goodbye. Jack Nicholson, Sean Penn, and other A-listers paid tribute to the man who had changed acting forever. But beneath the legend was a man who had suffered immense personal loss. His talent made him immortal, but his life was filled with heartbreak. Even in death, Marlon Brando remains one of Hollywood's most fascinating figures.